So good afternoon, people, and welcome to this webinar on preventing polarization in communities by creating a shared identity. And this webinar is brought to you by RAN, Radicalization Awareness Network. And this is a network of first-line practitioners throughout the EU working on preventing and countering violent extremism. And it has done so for over 9 years, almost 10 years now, with a total of 6,000 people who are within the network. My name is Rick Schelen. I'm one of the RAN staff since kind of half a year now, and I'll be hosting this webinar. We'll have three, I hope to be excellent presentations on this interesting topic from three different angles, because shared identity is providing the citizens of our cities and our communities with a kind of a safe haven in a world that's really polarizing and trembling all over. So how could we do this best? We'll have a look at this from the perspective of a city or from really local community theater work, which also can be done. And we actually had a meeting on this, a 2-day meeting a few weeks ago. Emilia Pirukangas will explain what we came up with as do's and don'ts of creating a shared identity. Our first speaker will be Emilia Pirukangas from Finland. She is a program manager at the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers, and she's covering Europe as well as parts of Middle East and North Africa. She's also the co-chair of the RAN working group on families, communities and social care. So she is one of the best people in place to tell us all about what's going on in the communities in our cities. And she will explain a little bit about what we came up with during the meeting a few weeks ago on the do's and don'ts of how to create a shared identity. Emilia, please give your presentation.
Thank you, Rick, for this kind introduction, and Julia also building us a good space to discuss with the house rules. Good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to be here with you today. I see that we have over 60 participants, so this reaffirms the conclusion of the last meeting that we had on the topic, that this is something that is very relevant to many of us working with local communities in European cities and elsewhere also. And maybe to say a few words about the background to this meeting on shared identities, it really is stemming from the fact that we have seen for a couple of years, but especially this year with COVID, that a lot of polarization is taking place. And we know from past experiences that one way to tackle that polarization and build a safe space to have dialogue on the issues that are affecting communities, handle the possible grievances there might be, is actually to build a common identity and based on the common good and rooted in the local community. And this is to say that we understand and respect the diversity of communities, but to say also that in order for us to advance the best in the community is a common understanding on the place where we can come to discuss these issues has to be created. And many times cities and authorities are on the driver's seat when we are thinking about how do we start building that enforcement to social cohesion, and where do we find the common values that different groups of people can identify with, and find that space to come together. So I have few takeaways from our past meeting. So I will stop my video and start sharing my screen just to share some of the ideas we came up with you all. So here we are. So as mentioned before, we did have 2 days meeting on how can we prevent polarization and build resilience by supporting the creation and maintenance of shared identities. And this was actually very multi and diverse group of practitioners that came together. So we had 25 participants from 13 countries, and this was actually co-organized with several run working groups together. So meaning that we had the good experiences from the working group of families, communities, and social, but then also from the working group of local, where many of the European authorities and cities are represented. Then we had the expertise from the RAN Communication and Narratives working group, and then also the youth and education, since we know that it's very important that we include the youth when we are talking about not only shared identity, but the effects and ways to tackle polarization, because this is very much affecting youth in our communities as well. So there was a lot of discussion that what is shared identity, and I'm sure that we in the audience currently have also many who have read social theory and maybe have an academic background also. So this is to say that concept of identity as such is very contested. And there are many definitions or working definitions around that, but we built our conversation around sort of the interactive concept and utilized as an example on the working concept, Alberto Melucci's concept on identity, which really focuses on the fact that identity is an interactive and shared definition produced by several individuals. And this was very useful for the sort of basis of the discussion in the meeting, since we had many stakeholders who were actively engaged with various citizen groups or various communities, and having dialogues and interactions between those, trying to establish those common values and common grounds that the communities can work together. So this sort of interactive and fluid understanding of identity and the interaction focus we found very suitable for our purposes in the last meeting. So as a sort of introduction to the discussion that we are going to have today, I will bring some aspects of shared identity to a common discussion that we can discuss later. And this is to say that these aspects that you see in the screen is the sort of key takeaways that the participants in the working group wanted to highlight, that when you start thinking about how the shared identity is created and maintained, you very quickly come into communications aspects. And we know that many cities and communities around Europe are actually promoting this shared identity via campaigns. So we were discussing that in order to be successful, what sort of resources do we have in the local communities that we could use as a fuel for a very successful campaign to promote shared identity? So it was reckoned by all of the practitioners involved in the discussion that it's important to root your campaign and the sort of the dialogue that you wish people to engage with to the local traditions, because this is the continuity that will sort of serve as a backbone for the shared identity that will evolve in the course of time. So identify those key traditions in your city or in your commune that gathers people around. So it's very good to link your campaign to these. And then common values. So we know that people have diverse set of values in general, but as a basis of shared identity, it's very important to identify those common denominators between different groups that people can commit to. And this usually takes some time and dialogue to identify these, and you should engage with the communities and people you seek to engage in the campaign in the process of identifying these values. Then the shared history. So we are all rooted in the place and time in many ways. So try to identify those stories in the community that people can relate to and build on that shared history when you're thinking where is our community or city, where is it going, and how do we advance people's belonging to our community, it's sometimes good to take a look back, where are we coming from, and how have people many times been able to, engage that history when they have arrived to our community or city and become part of that story. So urban spaces, we know that many times also there are particular places in a city or in a community where people organically gather and they feel belongingness to. I many times use from my home city, Helsinki, we have this public library called Oodi, and no matter sort of which group of people you ask, what is the best place in Helsinki, no matter the age group or the social sort of background they come from, I would say that at least in top 3, no matter whom you ask, they will say that Oodi is something particular. So this is to say that there are these places that people feel connected to in a very sort of vast scale. And then obviously the local and national events can be very useful when you think where and how you're gonna engage people. So usually in these events where people are emotionally attached with, you will find them to engage with them. And then recognizing that identity is not a unified feature of any person or any community, but there is a lot of factors and features in play. And this is very important that we understand that when we seek to engage people in the discussion that, what is the shared identity between us or this community, and how do we sort of from similar or different backgrounds can contribute to the common good or the common goals that we have as a group of people. It is important to take into account that the age and the gender and the social status in a way that how do you communicate to different groups of people in a way that your message is inclusive and the ways that you are promoting them to participate are accessible. So you need to do a little bit of analysis that whom you are trying to engage. Probably you're trying to engage everybody, and then make strategies of communication taking into account these different factors. This is the teaser.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would like to ask you to speed it up a little bit
Yes.
because we might run out of time.
Thank you, Rick. Well noted. So this is particularly how the do's and don'ts list that will be finalized by our RAN colleagues will look like later on. So this is just a teaser of that list, but there are really 3 broad categories of do's and don'ts that were identified. And maybe one important principle is that you need to strike the balance. How do you design a campaign, or how do you identify the pieces of that shared identity you wish to promote? Is probably not only coming from the community or only coming from the authorities. So it's a process of dialogue. So strike a balance. How do you engage from the bottom up and top down approaches to identify the needed pieces? And then also you should take into account that it's never one story and it's never one sort of interpretation on the conditions. So there usually are grievances and legitimate grievances. So in order to engage with people and have their buy-in, you sometimes need to understand to also make space to discuss and handle those grievances, but not solely focus on the differences. And the last point that the communication teams who are working on the campaigns do need to understand the communities, and this already goes back to what I said, that you need to know your audience and what are their priorities in order to tap into things that people really care about. And then to understand that having a positive social cohesion and shared identity, it's a long-term process that, it's decades-long process. So to avoid any short-term campaigns without having the follow-up actions and thinking that how does this relate to the next steps that we might have. And then to have a successful campaign, it's good to always remember that how do we reach and activate the silent middle majority in our communities and societies. And then for me, it is shown that I'm paused. So maybe Rick is telling me that enough time has passed. I'm saying that there is a last slide that then later on will be shared with you. And this is about diversity. So the inclusive language, the diverse set of people involved in the campaign, and focusing on the common issues and not on the differences between groups. So I would rest my case here and look forward to the presentations and conversation.
Okay, thank you. Then we will just move on to Rebecca. She's working with Odd Arts UK. She's the CEO there. And Joe Lane, who is a project manager with Odd Arts, is also around to answer questions if needed. Odd Arts Theatre is based in Manchester, the UK. And they work in justice, education, and in neighborhoods, and they work with the use of theater to build people's esteem, and so, as they say, to empower people to change their own lives. So really curious about your story, Rebecca. Please share with us what you're doing in Manchester.
Brilliant, thanks. Is my screen being shared?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. So just to explain, there's lots of pictures throughout this. They don't necessarily correlate exactly with what I say, but they're all linked to the projects I'm talking about, and they look really nice. So I'll put those in. So yeah, just to explain a bit about Odd Arts, hopefully I can explain it in a way that gives you some understanding on how we use theatre to create a shared identity and overcome polarisation. As Rick said, we're based in Manchester. We work in the criminal justice, education and community sectors. We use therapeutic theatre programmes in prisons, often trying to reduce violence. We do social action campaigns with communities, using theatre really as a platform to raise people's grievances or as activism. And we also deliver interactive theatre performances which are around prevention to around 25,000 people every year. Something that's important about us as a theatre company that makes us very different to most theatre companies is all of our work is underpinned by restorative approaches. It's all trauma informed, and it uses non-violent communication. I can answer more on that later, but that's something that's really important to the style of how we work with people and use theatre. The themes that we look at are quite varied. I'd say the thing that brings them together is that they're often in response to public health issues. So some of our specialisms are around radicalisation and extremism, knife crime, sexual assault, exploitation, mainly really unpleasant subjects, as you can hear, but using that in a way to try and prevent and overcome some of these issues. The participants we work with are really varied. We're working with people with lived experience of the criminal justice system, people seeking asylum and refugees, people experiencing mental health challenges or who may have been sectioned, or members within the community who are struggling with certain issues. The one thing I would say that's a commonality amongst our participants is they are more likely to have experienced racism, experienced systemic inequalities, have been stigmatized and have faced multiple barriers and disadvantages. So we're not saying that a refugee is the same as somebody who's in prison. However, we recognise that some of the barriers that people face are quite similar in who we work with. So in terms of actually an example around this subject, I'm really pleased to share an example. Jo, who's somewhere here, I can't see her, but Jo's been delivering a project for us in Manchester during the pandemic, which, as you can imagine, has been really challenging. Manchester's been one of the, a really badly hit area for the pandemic in the UK. So I'm going to give you an example of this one project to try and address the issues. So this project's been funded by RadEqual, which is a campaign funded by the Home Office via Manchester City Council, and its aims to try and connect people and to challenge people and to champion things in the city, but around challenging issues, really. And we've been able to deliver a project called How We Belong. So Manchester, probably lots of you know about it, but it's a really diverse city. It's a really creative city. It's got loads of opportunities. It's also got huge amounts of issues and challenges and deprivation. And I don't need to tell you all, you know, it's a city that experienced a huge extremist attack, and that's had huge ripple effects with particular communities. And it is relevant also that people involved in that attack were brought up in this city and went to school in this city. But as I say, it's a fantastic, diverse city. But we wanted to explore through theatre how people feel they belong in this city and try and enable people to connect more with themselves and with Manchester. So we worked with two groups. One was called Back on Track. They work with people who've experienced homelessness and also lived experience of the criminal justice system. And we also work with a group called City of Sanctuary, and that's people seeking refuge and asylum in the city. We worked separately with these groups, first of all. We didn't want to bring people who might otherwise see each other as other. We worked separately with them. And the way we did that is initially we show them a theatre performance called Blame and Belonging. This addresses the issues of radicalisation. It looks at the far right and it looks at Daesh or so-called Islamist inspired radicalisation. And we look at the process of radicalisation and how people come disconnected. And then each group separately responds to that performance. They respond to issues that triggered them or they connect with, and they create their own artwork to this. Both these groups had chance to do this in a safe environment separately. And it was quite interesting because both these groups might otherwise have seen one another as different, or they may have had quite negative perceptions and stereotypes towards one another. So they created their own showcase around these issues, which were really challenging. And then they put that on to people that they knew and they shared that. The next phase, which was really exciting, is that we got to bring these two groups together. And they then created their own theatre performance on the theme of how they belong in Manchester. You know, they had the chance to explore challenges they've been through. There's some quotes here that are from this project that will come up just to say that you can read. But they, interestingly enough, something that really connected them and that they really felt made them disconnected with the city was issues around domestic violence and also issues around homelessness. Now, that's not something we actually expected. And I find that really interesting because more and more I've heard that there's a lot of, you know, research and thoughts going into how this polarizes people and also puts people at increased risk as well. So it was really fascinating that both these groups from completely different backgrounds found a way to connect, and this was a shared identity for them. It might seem quite negative, but exploring that together gave them a really, really good connection, and then they could create a theatre piece. So some of the reasons we think theatre's really good for doing this is it enables people to explore things that are otherwise unspeakable or inexplicable. There's a lot of shame we find with people we work with, a lot of stigma, a lot of things that are really complicated. And because people can put their feelings and emotions onto a character or a performance or a piece of art, they can actually express things that they'd otherwise not dare say. I just want to go through some of these quotes as well. You can see it's been really important for people to use art to actually find a sense of belonging. And sometimes for people to find a sense of belonging, they actually need to express how they've not belonged. And I think, again, that's a really important lesson for us, is to not only focus on positives, but actually allow people to work through some of the challenges they faced. Here's some more quotes from this project. You can see here the pictures. These are the two groups and the performance they made together. One of the quotes, I can't think where it is, but Joe told me that in one of the sessions, when asked what belonging meant, one of the participants said, well, this is it. This is belonging. And that's with these two groups that had otherwise really not had positive attitudes towards one another or necessarily the city, had found a place to feel safe and like they belonged and explore some of these really complex issues. Yeah, I mean, other reasons I think theatre is really powerful and what's really important in this subject area is that you don't come in with a preconception of what's right or wrong and how people should belong. I think it's really important we give people who have the least voice a platform to actually share these grievances. And I think these are some of the ways that people really do feel they've suddenly connected and accepted within a city. I also want to reflect on things that I've learned because I set Odd Arts up 17 years ago, and it's taken a long time to learn some of these things. But some of the ways that I think some of the things that I think are really vital to a successful campaign in making, enabling people to feel they belong. I think it's really important that Odd Arts reflects the community we work with, and that isn't necessarily easy. It takes loads of work to encourage people who might feel unheard or discriminated against to know they belong in applying to your organisation, having a role there. But that's really important. You need to be a permanent fixture. It has taken us well over a decade to get accepted by lots of the diverse community organisations in Manchester, but they're the organisations that let us do what we can do, really. I think it's really important to acknowledge our partners' skills and expertise and not use them. So often groups say they feel used for their knowledge and opinions. So the council or somebody else might come in and say, give us all this information, tell us how you feel. But actually they're saying this is a skill set. We're the least paid, we're the most deprived community. Can people please acknowledge and pay us for our skill set? So that's something that, we've had to really learn. It's important that we remain apolitical, and it's sometimes really, really difficult for our staff and us. But actually what we found is the less political we are, the more political other people can become and the more socially active other people can become. So we don't want to tell people what to think, but we do want people to feel that they are stakeholders in society. It's really important to expect the unexpected. It's really important to sit amongst uncomfortable conversations and be willing to learn places that you've gone wrong before and how you can change. And again, that long-term standing in a community is really important, that people see you are willing to be challenged and you are willing to learn from that. I think it's really important to have transparency in your aims. So this work around belonging was also trying to reduce risk of radicalisation. We don't want to be lying to people about the issues. Transparency and openness and truth is really important. And then also a community-led approach. So genuinely listen to what the community is telling you and do that, even if it's, slightly more difficult. But hopefully I've given you a good idea of how we use theatre. It's a process to make people understand themselves or understand the world differently. And it does it in quite a, I suppose, complicated but effective way.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Rebecca. So now we will move to the city of Mechelen in Belgium. We've got two people working there with us. This is Werner van Herle. He's the head of the Division of Prevention and Safety, and Simon Huybrechts, who is a specialist at innovation at the city of Mechelen. So they can tell us all about the prevention project Mechelen has been doing for quite a few years now, and the innovation that's taking place in the last months since the COVID time. So please take it away, both of you.
My name is Werner van Herle. I am responsible for the unit Prevention Public Safety in the city of Mechelen, which is a small city just between Brussels and Antwerp, for those who don't know it. We have about 87,000 inhabitants, residents. One of the largest cities in Flanders, though. A very important historical city also. We were the capital of the Netherlands in the 16th century, the early 16th century. Played an important role in the industrialization of Belgium with the railroads who started to be developed from and around Mechelen. First train in the mainland in Europe drove between Brussels and Mechelen, so quite an important city to be there. We are also a very multicultural city, which is presented on the next slide. We have about 1 in 3 persons with a foreign heritage who are citizens in Mechelen, who live in Mechelen. In the early 1960s, we started to sign some trade agreements with other countries, third countries, for people, labor migrants to come to work in Mechelen, which nowadays led to about 138 different countries of origin, people living in Mechelen from about 138 different countries. 1 in 2 children, about 50%, is between the age of 0 and 12 years of old, has a foreign background. So we are quite a very multicultural, super diverse city. A lot of newcomers also, a lot of language that are spoken. So it's a city where we have faced with a lot of challenges towards living together in harmony, in diversity, and to share this same space. Okay, so how did we do that? In the identity of Mechelen is always built around the idea that people make the city. This is a picture of those 138 inhabitants from the different countries living in Mechelen. And the idea is that people make the city who we are, who creates Mechelen identity, and that identity is defined by what all those people are doing, what stories they are telling about Mechelen, what stories they are bringing to Mechelen, and how they engage themselves for communal goals and how they engage themselves in the community. This is also a celebration of 50 years of migration. It was in 2014 where we said, this is Mechelen. These are the people of Mechelen who are placed against this historical background. So Mechelen is not just old buildings and tourism and so on. It's the people who make the city and not the historical background who makes the city. Of course, that's just a vision, an idea that we have on being inclusive, because becoming a part of that goal, of that idea, is creating some basis for the inclusion, feeling a part of everything. It hasn't always been like that. In the late 1990s, beginning 2000s, crime was really high in Mechelen. We had about the highest crime rates in Belgium, higher than Antwerp, for instance. And we had a big perception of being insecure as a city. We were called Chicago at the Dale. So it set a certain image of Mechelen. People who could afford it, they left the city, left the inner city, going to surrounding neighborhoods. So it was about the time that Mr. Somers, our foreign mayor, now minister at the Flemish government, yes, he was mayor and from 2000 until 2019, more or less. And he had another idea about it. He had this vision, this policy strategy that he wanted to implement, that we had to be very strict on law enforcement, because people who are feeling insecure are not feeling very well in a city. So we had to act upon that. And he was one of the first mayors who was really investing a lot in police, in cameras, in new technology, and in being really strict on law enforcement. But at the same time, the embracement of diversity as an asset, as a richness, which is very important, with also a positive narrative about all minorities. Combination of those two axes, let's say, of those two dimensions, is really, really important in his policy vision. And he tried to build a new narrative about Mechelen, and everybody is of Mechelen. There's not an us versus them narrative that we try to avoid. Of course, that's a vision, that's a sense of a leadership, if you want. We had to do something also, of course. And the key policy has been around two guiding principles: alienation and connection. We are aware that a lot of young people can build some frustrations about the situations they're in, can build some frustrations due to negative social interactions with other peoples, often in social institutions. They feel unjust, humiliating, and so on and so on, which can bring them in some sort of vulnerable position that can be exploited, let's say, by recruiters of illegal networks. So the key in the work that we're doing in Mechelen is building reconnection with social institutions. And prevention practitioners, in the first place, what they do is not take over when there's some problems, but they try to reinforce the social institutions to deal with these problems themselves. So that's big, the main focus of the idea. But of course, a lot of this work is being done offline, and it's the most logical place to start as a local government. We're the best place to find some answers in those local security needs in offline settings. But more and more we see that the online discourse and the online respectful dialogue is disappearing, and which is creating more and more toxic environments for everybody to live in. So and traditionally, local governments are saying online is nothing for us. It's something. What can we do against the Googles and Facebook and Instagrams of this world? We can't do anything about it, but it's the local people who are using these channels, these social media channels. There's a local people who are creating content and who are creating toxic environments, I'm sorry. So that's why we are trying to create and find some solutions to build an inclusive society online. But for now, I will leave it just on this one, and I give the word to Simon, who will take over from here.
Yes, thank you, Werner. So as Werner was saying, we believe that there is still a lot to be gained from really entering the online world as a local government, not only to better understand certain narratives and respond to them, but also to pick up signs of frustration or isolation. And we believe the first step in achieving all this is really building an online presence as a local government. And when discussing this, we've divided it into two main pillars. We want to become more actively present online, not only by doing online outreach work, with really engaging with certain youngsters, but also by creating online safe spaces where people can speak their mind freely and interact with us or with other professionals in a safe environment. But for example, also by using influencers to target to better reach out to certain target groups. But more on the active part later. First, let's talk about the building a passive presence. This builds upon a pilot project we've done in 2019, where the goal was to detect people vulnerable for extremism online. Now, when we say vulnerable for extremism, that indicates we want to detect people in an early stage of the radicalization process. So we're not crawling the dark web in search of people who are making bombs, but we're really focusing on people who are losing connections with the social institutions, like Werner was saying. And the first step we took there was to research whether it was possible to detect people vulnerable for extremism. So we contacted a software supplier who helped us create software that was able to gather vast amount of data, open source data from social media, comments from news websites, and many more. And then we started to apply filters to them. For example, somebody was using a lot of highly emotionally heavy words in combination with certain keywords referring to other cultures or beliefs. That could be a sign of frustration towards something. And we've also found out that early detection is wanted. When talking to a lot of partners, everybody believed in this concept that next to receiving signals from our offline partners, from schools, from youth workers, it's valuable to create a system where we can receive signals from online sources. But at the same time, we were investigating the juridical point of view of this kind of project. And we went to a local privacy commission, we proposed our project, and we've stated we've based us upon these and these laws. But they said we don't see it like that. We don't think there's a clear juridical framework you can base yourself upon. So this also meant we couldn't really test our framework we created, by which we wanted to bridge the gap between online detection and offline inclusion. But we hope to continue this work next year. We've written a Horizon 2020 proposal, so I hope to inform you about this in a later meeting. Then how can we create an active presence? The first thing we've thought about was maybe we can have outreaching workers or prevention workers really engage with youngsters online. But when discussing this topic with some outreach workers, they told us, yeah, I don't really feel comfortable doing that. And I get it, because outreach work is based upon trust, a relationship of trust. And that is best built when you act natural, when you feel comfortable in an environment. So that got us thinking maybe we should attract different profiles and with people with different skill sets that are comfortable behaving online. So that's really something we will investigate further in 2021. But before you think we didn't do anything this year. This year we started to create safe spaces online. The first one was in a more traditional setting, in a Zoom call, where we brought together youngsters and professionals and talked about certain conspiracy theories that the pandemic brought along. And that really worked. That was nice. But we've also tested it in a less traditional method. We've organized a Twitch tournament. For those of you who don't know, Twitch is a streaming platform in which people can share the game they're playing. They can share their screen like now, and other people can see them and chat with them. And it's really an informal setting. But a lot of youngsters are using it right now, anyway, in Belgium. So we thought maybe we should go where the youngsters are. Maybe we can create a safe space there now. And the idea was to create a FIFA tournament in which we've invited some youngsters to play in a tournament of soccer FIFA online. And at the same time, we could have some professionals talk about the Corona crisis or some more serious topics in an informal setting now. And I must say, when we take participants as a performance indicator, this wasn't a great success because it's the first time on this platform for us. But I don't think it would be the last time we create a safe space on Twitch. No. This is a picture I've included from Twitch. You see some player, some gamer, sharing their screen and chatting with people, really an informing setting. But to close up this presentation, we strongly believe in building an online presence, as we've built an offline presence, but there are a lot of questions that remain unanswered. There are a lot of ethical and juridical questions. There's a lot of work to be done there. And it always has to be complementary to our offline work. Our overarching goal is still to prevent polarization and radicalization, and to include people and to strengthen bonds with social institutions. So we have to keep that goal in mind. So I think I can close off this presentation with the words "to be continued." I thank you.
Thank you all for participating, and thank you all panelists once again. I think it's time to close up the webinar and wish everybody a good evening, and stay safe out there, because all the COVID that's going on, it's real dangerous for some months to go. So stay safe and have a good Christmas time. Okay, bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
See you all. Take care.